the ones that say the early, I had handed them out last week. Those of you who are not at Century Village, I emailed them to you. So you should have them in front of you. Okay. And the title, the pages I'm doing today are the early Achronim of Germany, Austria, Bohemia, and Moravia. Let me just catch my breath. Because I ran up the stairs. Okay, so do you all hear me? You all see me?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So I'm going to go ahead. What I had done last week, obviously those of you on the circle, you weren't at the class. I gave the history, the background history, particularly of the 17th century. But today, what we're going to do is discuss the great Rabbanim and their works in the same time period. But it's also, I'm including also 16th century, and then we're going into the 17th century. So all the Rabbanim that I'm going to be discussing with you, they're in chronological order. I mean, some overlap, one another, but and they're all from what we call Middle Europe. And that's including, Germany, Austria, and when we say Bohemia and Moravia, that's the former Czechoslovakia. All right. Bohemia is the Czech Republic today. All right. And I do have a map here, which I didn't have a chance to send you guys in advance, but I'll describe where everything is as we mentioned place names. All right. So we're going to start off with the Rabbi Yaakov Margolis. All right. And now if you know anybody with the last name Margolis, so you can see, it goes back quite a bit. It's a German name. All right, so I'll describe to you a little bit about Rabbi Yaakov Margolis. You can just follow along on your sheets, all right? And then I'll add extra info. Rabbi Yaakov was a Rav in Nuremberg, Germany. Of course, today we certainly know Nuremberg because of the Nuremberg laws from the Nazi era, where he was considered to be one of the Torah greats of his generation. He was an expert on the laws of Gittin and Chalitza. Gittin, that's divorce, and Chalitza is, if a man dies and he has no children with his wife then his brother is supposed to marry his widow, and if they have children, so to speak, will be after the name of that original husband. All right, but usually what's done, you don't do it. There's a whole ceremony, the Chalitza ceremony, so this doesn't have to take place. In any case, he also wrote a manual composed on these laws and is quoted extensively by the Raman, the Shulchan Aruch. Just remind, the Shulchan Aruch was written by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who's a Sephardic Jew. He came originally from Spain, left when he was a little toddler at 4 years old after the expulsion, 1492, wound up in Constantinople. From Constantinople, he went to Eretz Israel and he settled in Tzfat. So the basic Shulchan Aruch is giving more of a little bit of a Sephardic slant. So the Ramah, who we will learn about when we start doing Poland, went through everything, line by line, and he put in with the Ashkenazi version as of a way of observing a particular point in Jewish law. Okay. Rabbi Yaakov's sons were also eminent scholars, and his Seder HaGet, was compiled by his son, Rabbi Yitzchak Margolis, who was a Rav in Prague. All right. You're going to see the borders are sort of fluid. And while a particular individual might be born, let's say, in one locale, he might go to study someplace else and then be hired as a Rav in a third location. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth here from country to country. At the end of his life, Rabbi Yaakov was involved in two wide-ranging controversies. We'll discuss them a little bit more soon. One regarding his disciple, Rabbi Yaakov Pollock, and the other one in reference to a decision rendered by Rabbi Avraham Mintz. All right, but we'll come to that when we come to it. Okay, next, Rabbi Yosef Yosselman. Look, it's Loanz. It's a typo error, so it's Loanz of Rishonim. Okay, Rabbi Yosselman was one of the greatest advocates for Jewry ever seen. And I'm reading a fascinating book about, I didn't realize myself how awful they were, the pogroms against the Jewish people after the Russian revolutions. This is 1919 to 1921, and you might have that time period is referred to the wars between the whites and the reds, and there was terrible famine, you know, in the land, and even in little towns, you know, where they would, when especially it was the whites, it was the whites who would come in and just loot and burn and rape and, you know, murder Jews left and right in these little tiny little shtetls. But every once in a while, there would be a rav in a particular town who would like stand up to them, and depending on the mood, right, of a particular, the leader of the pogrom, he might decide, all right, to be more lenient, or sometimes it just literally shot the rav in the head right away. Okay. So anyway, so this man, going back several centuries prior to those awful pogroms, right, in the 20th century, he himself was not afraid to speak up on behalf of Jewry. He was appointed the Parnas Umanhig, which means the guide and leader of the Jewish communities of Lower Alsace. Now, when we think of Alsace, we think of like Alsace-Lorraine, that's France. But at this point in time, remember, it was always a place of contention between the French and the Germans. So at this point, though, it's obviously German rule, okay? And he was given the right to issue enactments for the Jews of his district. He was also authorized to issue bans against recalcitrant members, right? You could put a cherem on somebody if they're not cooperating. And actually, it was very harsh punishment, because you could have zero contact with anybody in your community. You were really ostracized. Even, let's say you would see somebody on the street that, you know, they would turn their head, they wouldn't even say hello to you. In addition, he had the responsibility to defend individuals and communities against oppression, and if necessary, to appeal to the governor and even to the emperor. Now, this we're talking about a rav of a higher level. You know, what I was talking about in those pogroms are often just the rabbonim of little tiny shtetls who were willing to speak up in defense of their Jews. Rabbi Yosman appeared several times before the Empress Maximilian I, and this is, we're talking about the Holy Roman Empire, and Charles V. Soon after Charles V ascended the throne in 1520, Rabbi Yosman procured a letter of protection from him for the whole of German Jewry. So he obviously was highly respected, you know, appearing there before the emperor, and the emperor was obviously suitably impressed, you know, and he granted this protection. He also successfully interceded several times with the emperor's brother, because where was he ruling? King Ferdinand, in favor of the Jews of Bohemia and Moravia. Okay, now the Holy Roman Empire does also include Austria, so just bear that in mind. In 1525, Rabbi Yosman succeeded in protecting the Jewish populace of Alsace. Okay, again, this is the border between France and Germany. Well, then it was Germany, against aggression by the hordes of peasants who had participated in the peasants' revolt. It was this awful uprising. I mean, they were so poor and destitute. But, you know, we're always caught in the middle. So even though their original focus is against the nobles, you know, the ruling parties, you know, in a particular region, but they always end up blaming the Jews, you know. In 1524 to 1526, the peasants of southern Germany rose up against the upper classes and the Catholic clergy. As usual, the Jewish population of the affected area suffered quite heavily from the excesses of the frenzied mob. And this peasants' revolt covered a pretty wide area. In his memoirs, Rabbi Yosman records many cases of persecution against the Jews of Germany. He records how there were many times, unfortunately, when the Jews were forced to become martyrs for their faith, which meant that they were murdered. Rabbi Yosman defended the Jews before the authorities, sometimes endangering his very life for their sake. He also defended the Jews against the virulently anti-Semitic attacks of Martin Luther. Last year, I had done the Protestant Reformation. Initially, Luther is very warm and welcoming to the Jews living in his midst in Germany. But then when he found, well, that they were not going to accept his version of Christianity, you know, either. So then he turned against them, and he wrote this most ugly tirades, you know, against the Jews. And in fact, during the Nazi era. Hitler used his writings. Rabbi Yosselman was an eminent Torah scholar and also found time to put his thoughts onto paper. He authored Sefer HaMiknah, which is an ethical and philosophic work divided into two parts. In part one, which dealt with ethics, he concentrated on the evil caused by informers. You know, in Shmon Esrei, we say Rishonim, right? That refers to informers, to the government. Included in this part are many examples of the harm caused by such informers. In the second part of his Sefer, Rabbi Yosselman, an Ashkenazi Jew, showed himself to be an adherent of the philosophy of Sephardic Jewry. All right, so let's say if you read the works of the Rambam or the Ramban or Ibn Ezra, or whatever, so he saw, great value to studying those things as well. Another person, Rabbi Chaim ben Betzalel. Okay, look at his dates already. So we're getting now closer to the end of the 16th century. Rabbi Chaim was born in Posen, Poland. Now look at this. Here we were talking about people in Alsace area, right? That's Western Germany. Now we're talking about somebody who's, remember, I told you borders are very fluid and people, there are Jews settled everywhere. Jews are obviously already are in Poland, and you'll see how they go back and forth. Rav Chaim was born in Posen, Poland. He was an older brother, Maharal, and we'll discuss him in a little bit. That's the Maharal of Prague. In 1535, he came to Worms. That's also like Western Germany, near Cologne, that area, where his uncle served as rabbi. There, Rav Chaim opened a yeshiva and began disseminating Talmudic knowledge. Upon his uncle's death, some 14 years later, Rav Chaim was appointed to succeed him as the chief rabbi of Worms. Not long after this, he was offered the rabbinate of Friedberg near Frankfurt am Main. That's, still the western part, of Germany, but more to the east. He served in this position until his death in 1588. Rav Chaim authored Igeres HaTiyul. That sounds nice. I don't think he's going on a trip, but right. Miscellaneous interpretations to biblical, Talmudic, and Midrashic passages. He also wrote Sefer HaChaim, a book on Musar. Okay, and that's like giving somebody Musar, explaining, how you should live an ethical life. He wrote both these ethical treatises during the plague which ravaged Friedberg in 1578. In addition, he composed Vikuach Mayim Chayim, a criticism of the Ramaz Torah Chataz on the dietary laws. Now, I don't know what's included in this and what he was critical about, but this is, what he was. And throughout the ages, people disagree with one another. Rav Chaim was a careful grammarian. And I don't know if you noticed, but ever since we started learning about the period of the Gaonim, with those are the ones who follow the Rabbonim of the Gemara, a big stress on grammar and diktuk, because to understand, let's say, the basic text, right, you need to really know your diktuk to properly interpret the word. He advocated the study of Hebrew language and grammar. To this, he dedicated an entire textbook entitled Eitz Chaim. He also wrote a super commentary to Rashi's commentary. There are, I can't begin to tell you how many of these super commentaries exist. These are people who would study Rashi and his Perush, right, on Tanakh, and then they would write a commentary on Rashi's words, his interpretation, trying to understand what does Rashi mean, or delving into his sources, etc. Okay, on the Chumash writing, he entitled that work Be'er Mayim Chayim. Okay, which we talked about. Let's go. Now we're going to talk about the Maharal of Prague. This is his real name is Rabbi Yehuda Low. Okay, like Lowy, right? I don't know if you know anybody with that last name. Okay. Now we're getting closer into the 17th century. Rabbi Yehuda, the youngest of four sons, was born in Posen, Poland. Again, here we have somebody coming initially from Poland and then going westward. His father was Rabbi Betzalel ben Chaim of Worms. Okay, so he came from Germany. And his grandfather was Rabbi Lo the Elder of Prague. This is, you see, back and forth, back and forth. His grandfather was a Torah scholar and a Kabbalist who traces ancestry to Rav Chai Gaon. This is one of the very last of the Gaonim, so around the year 1000. Okay, The Goanim, by the way, are in Babylonia today, Iraq. Okay, and he can trace his heritage all the way back to King David. Rabbi Yehuda's brothers were also accomplished scholars and the progenitors of famous families. Rabbi Bezalel's brothers traveled to Poland to study in its famous yeshivas. Again, this is the father, Rabbi Bezalel. So talking about, how they went to that's how they ended, even though they originally were German, then they're going to Poland to study. Because at this point, we haven't discussed the history of the Jews of Poland, but they are already becoming well established there after they, started settling there already in the 1500s. But he stayed, remember, he's the youngest child. So the brothers now go to Poland to study, but he remained in Worms to take care of his aged father. This next sentence, I left out some words. I'm going to be filling them in now till they make sense. Rav Chaim consoled him. In other words, so his now father is going to console him because, he has stayed behind. He hasn't had a chance to go and study, at the yeshivas. He consoled him that he in turn would be blessed, right? Because he's doing this great deed, this great kibbud of taking care of his old elderly father, that he himself would be blessed with 4 sons of his own, and they in turn would become great scholars in their own right. So that was very lovely. The Maharal served as rabbi in several localities. His first rabbinic post was in Nikolsburg, Moravia. Okay, that just those of us who remember Czechoslovakia. So we're talking about Eastern Czechoslovakia, to which he was elected in 1553. Eventually, he became chief rabbi of all of Moravia. Okay, so we're talking about the eastern part of what was Czechoslovakia. The Maharal enacted many edicts for the religious and economic improvement of the communities of Moravia, where he served as their spiritual leader for 20 years. He's not yet even in Prague, and he's already making a great impression. The Maharal left Nikolsburg in 1573 and settled in Prague, where he opened a yeshiva and taught numerous disciples. He was an outspoken opponent of the widespread pilpul method of Talmudic study introduced by Rabbi Yaakov Pollack. Remember, we had already alluded to it, that there were some great controversies. And one of the controversies was using pilpul as a method of, let's say, interpreting or trying to understand, let's say, the Gemara. So you might have heard somebody express, a person gave a brilliant pilpul. It's quoting lots of different peoples and comparing a lot of things, but it's also very confusing. It's very, unless you're a brilliant scholar yourself, it's a little hard to follow the discourse. So like, as I'm going to tell you a little bit more, the Maharal was very opposed to this way of learning and stressing, it's a way of showing off, and he said, that's not a way to properly study, either the Tanakh or the Gemara. Let me see. He specifically opened his yeshiva for the purpose of expounding Talmud and halacha using a logical method, everything like one thing after another, right? Without pilpul. He also stressed the study of Mishnah. He's actually quite famous for this. And he established Mishnah study groups throughout Prague. And, today, people do daf yomi, you're studying a page of the Gemara. There's a daf, something with Mishnah also that's around. Obviously, it doesn't last as long. The daf yomi on the Gemara is 7.5 years. And he established Mishnah study groups throughout Prague. Among his disciples, Rabbi David Gans and Rabbi Yovtov Lippman Heller, and we'll be discussing these gentlemen in a little while. The Maharal took an active part in the interests of the community, as he had formerly done in Moravia. He was also responsible for the formulation of the bylaws. These are takanos, changes he's making in certain things, of all newly founded communities of Bohemia. While in Prague, the Maharal began redacting and publishing his many, many manuscripts. His first work was called Bur Aryeh, pretty well known. It's a super commentary to Rashi's Torah commentary, right? Just like we had learned before. There, as I say, I don't know, tens and tens, if not over 100 people who wrote these super commentaries. In 1584, the Maharal temporarily left Prague and accepted the rabbinic post of Posen, only to return to Prague in 1588 because he was a lot more comfortable, in that city. And maybe they took better care of him. Maral's fame as a saint and miracle worker then began to spread among those, along with his reputation for wisdom. It came to the attention of Emperor Rudolph II of Austria, who had a private audience with him in the royal palace in the winter of 1592. So you can see he's so respected, not just in Jewish circles, but obviously in political circles. That same year, Maral again left Prague and reassumed the rabbinical post of Posen and its neighboring communities. He remained there till 1598, when the Prague community officially installed him as their chief rabbi. Maybe this is what he was waiting for, to get this invitation. Maral was a profound thinker and a prolific author. He synthesized Kabbalistic concepts with Aggadic and Midrashic material, discarding the Kabbalistic terminology and presenting his material in a style uniquely his own. His writings stressed the conceptual aspect of the Aggadas, pointing out that they contain profound truths. The Aggadah, in the Midrash, those are like stories, expounding on what's written in the Tanakh. He emphasized repeatedly that all the sayings of the sages are profound and true, and may not be disregarded. The Maharal wrote an entire work, which is called the Be'er HaGolah, to explain some Aggados which appear to contradict science and to be illogical. And this is a problem going all the way to our modern times. I mean, there are things that are written, let's say, what he's doing with the Midrash and the Aggadah, but let's say even in the Gemara, I am learning that now, and there's some pronouncements in there. I mean, obviously, we have totally disproved those ideas, ways of thinking. So it's, most, unfortunate to say that you have to totally accept everything that's written. But whatever, he's making every possible effort to reconcile, any possible conflicts there might be. The Maharal also had strong opinions about Jewish education. I think this is quite interesting. He was against the practice of teaching young children Talmud. Like in a lot of the yeshivas, they started doing Gemara with the kids from, I don't know, maybe third grade, fourth grade, I'm not sure when they begin. Instead, he espoused the system proposed in the Mishnah, and that's in Pirkei Avos, it's volume 5, Pasuk 21, which should be followed. And this is what it says there in Pirkei Avos. Only when a child reached the age of 15 should one begin to study Talmud. He felt that only after a firm foundation in scriptures, that would be in Tanakh, and Mishnah, should one be introduced to Gemara, because Gemara is very complicated and lots of different arguments are being presented. The others are much more clear cut, much easier to understand. So he felt that you needed a degree of maturity, before you could tackle, the discussions that are in the Gemara. He also was opposed to the study of the weekly Parsha. Isn't interesting, right? And felt that scripture, meaning Tanakh or Chumash, right, should be studied in sequence from beginning to end, thereby covering all of the material. I guess today I would say we do both, right? But still very interesting. The Maharal also stressed the great importance of Chazara. Oh, and this is true, right, for everybody in any field of study. Intensive and constant review of one's learning. He also felt that the study of Mishnah was essential for adults, right, in particular. So not just for the children and the yeshivas should be learning it, but every adult should study Mishnah. And it was essential for adults, and he instituted Mishnah study groups in Prague and other towns. Among the wondrous deeds of the Maharal, the story arose. This is a total legend. This is a fabrication, but it's like this. People started talking about this, and it's spread, but it is not true. Okay, that's the story of the golem. Among the wondrous deeds of Maharal, the story arose that in order to combat the popular blood libel that Christians use against the Jews almost every Passover, every Pesach, he fashioned a man out of clay. He then imbued this figure with life and supernatural powers. Remember, he said, put something on the head, that would say emet, truth, right? using Kabbalistic incantations and directed it to protect the Jewish community. Again, I want to emphasize this is a legend. All right. Halavai. That this were true, I mean, I've seen pictures, I have not been there, but if you go to his shul, the Maharal shul in Prague, so high up, like in the attic area, supposedly this is where the golem is, or this piece of clay still resides, and it's locked. You have no access to it. Okay. Now we're going to talk about two other gentlemen who we had referred to already, and I will now discuss them. Okay, one is Rabbi David Gans. He was born in Lippstadt, Germany. Not sure 100% where Lippstadt is, but someplace in Germany at a young age. He went, though, to Krakow and stayed at the home of the Ramah. Whoa, so he really learned under a top individual, where he was both raised and taught. He later settled in Prague, all right, so he's already in his 20s, where he studied secular disciplines, right? So he's really broadening his education and from many different fields, especially astronomy and mathematics. And remember when we had done the Rabbanim from Spain, these were the, even Provence, these were the areas of secular knowledge that Jews felt was acceptable. They felt like philosophy was a big point of debate, in the medieval era, because they felt it could lead one to leave Judaism. But something like mathematics, first of all, you used it a lot in figuring out like the calendar, although the permanent calendar already was established already in the 400s in Israel. But whatever, these two fields of science were okay to study. And also, it's not mentioned here, perhaps not for this man, but many, especially medieval Rabbanim, then became doctors, right? So they studied medicine. His best known work is Tzemach David, which is a historical chronicle divided into two parts, both Jewish and non-Jewish chronology. I always find that fascinating too, when you're studying Jewish history. But what else is going on in the general world at that time? In his introduction, Rav David wrote that the knowledge of history brings one closer to God, to recognizing the thread of divine providence, and to realizing how God protects his people. Although many kingdoms have arisen and fallen, the Jewish nation continues to exist. And I don't know that Hashem always protects us, right? I mean, just look from Jewish history, but ultimately somehow there are always remnants that do survive, and we continue. An expert astronomer and mathematician, Rav David corresponded with some of the foremost scientists of his day. He was also allowed access to the observatory in Prague. That's interesting. And Rav David composed a work on astronomy with a heavy stress on the calculation of the Jewish calendar. Again, it was already established going back into the, I can't remember, it was in the 4th century or in the 400s. He also traced the development of astronomy among both Jews and non-Jews. Okay, here's another person, not as famous, but they're all so interesting. They all make contributions to what we would call the oral law, the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Rabbi Yitzhak Chavis. Okay, where is he? Rabbi Yitzhak was a descendant of the sages of Provence. Wow, that's southern France. And he served successfully in the rabbinates of Proznitz, no idea where that is, and Prague. He attracted numerous disciples with his erudition and saintliness. Rabbi Yitzchak was a fervent adherent of the Pilpul method. Okay, so here's somebody who loved that way of learning. So popular in that era. Rabbi Yitzchak wrote the Pnei Yitzchak, okay, which was in two parts. The first part includes laws found in the Shulchan Aruch, Yoredeya, set to rhyme. That's interesting. I guess it's sort of like a mnemonic way of remembering everything. And the second part is a commentary on the poetic part with additional halachic material. His son, Rabbi Manish Chayes, added two poetic elegies. One elegy on the destruction of the city of Posen by fire in the year 1590, and another to lament the death of his 18-year-old son, Rabbi Yitzchak, who also wrote Pachad Yitzchak, a commentary on the Talmudic passage in Gittin, which deals with the destruction of the temple and other agadic matters. He also wrote Siach Yitzchak, a compendium of the laws of Pesach set to rhyme. Very obviously into poetry, into studying, halacha, into poetic form. Rabbi Yitzhak had other sons and grandsons who became prominent rabbis of their respective generations. Okay, here's another guy. Not so much biographical information about him, but I am sure you have all heard of him. Okay, it's Rabbi Shlomo Ephraim Lunchitz. He was a disciple of the Maharshal. Oh, that's another Rav. Okay, Rav Ephraim. The name Shlomo was added during an illness. We do that sometimes. The name Chaim or Chaya to a child's name when they're ill. He served as Rosh Yeshiva in Lemberg, and from 1604 until his death as Rabbi of Prague. Rabbi Shlomo Ephraim excelled in the field of homiletics. That's when you're giving a sermon and you're expounding and propounding, on the text and coming up with some modern day, a way of interpreting. And he authored numerous works, all considered to be classics. He is particularly known for his Torah commentary, the Kli Yakar. All right, so I'm sure you've gone to lectures and you have heard people quote the Kli Yakar. So I don't have so much information about him, but he's certainly known for his commentary. Rabbi Ephraim also authored Slichos to be said at a special service on 2 Adar. Why? In remembrance of the suffering of the Jews of Prague during the pogroms perpetrated there in 1611. Okay, so now you know who the Kli Yakar is, right? And just kind of associate him also with, like Czechoslovakia. Here's another, a very famous, I've heard him quoted too. I didn't know if you have. His name, he's known by the acronym of a book he wrote. We'll discuss this. He's called the Shalah, but his real name is Rabbi Yeshaya Horowitz. All right. And he's already going more into, that 17th century. Rabbi Yeshaya was born either in Prague or Lemberg, Poland. Obviously, the records are not so clear, so we don't know 100%. But I told you the Jews traveled back and forth. He descended from a long line of scholars, and his father, Rabbi Avraham, was a scholar of note and a disciple of the Ramah. Again, that's a very famous one who wrote the Ashkenazi interpretation of the Shulchan Aruch. Rabbi Yeshaya and his brother studied under their father in their youth, but also under some of the great rabbis of Poland. Rabbi Yeshaya journeyed to Krakow. All right, it's going to be a great center of Jewish learning, where he became a pupil of Rabbi Shlomo Ladbush of Lublin. He also studied under Maharam, Lublin, and Rabbi Yoshua Falk Katz. His talents were recognized at an early age, and soon after 1590, his rabbinical career began. His various posts took him throughout Poland and Russia to important Torah centers such as Dubno, Ostra, Posen, and Krakow. So even though, he's born in, Bohemia, he's spending a lot of his early years in Poland, where he's studying under some very great men. Rabbi Yeshaya's reputation spread far beyond the confines of Poland and Russia, and he was called to serve the rich and flourishing community of Frankfurt am Main about the year 1606. Rabbi Yeshaya remained there until 1614, when the calm of the community was disturbed by the anti-Semitic fentanyl uprising. I had to actually discuss that last week when I just in general talked about, the Jews of Germany, and this was a rabble-rouser who convinced the townfolk to expel all the Jews from their community, like almost overnight, and only later on with the interference of the emperor were they invited back in. Okay, they did not return to their homes until 1616, and thereafter, the day of 20th of Adar was designated a joyous day called Purim Vincenz. Returning to Prague, Rabbi Yeshaya served there as rabbi together with Rabbi Ephraim Lunchitz, Kli Yakar, right, until the latter's death in 1619. At that point, Rabbi Yeshaya was named as his successor. Rabbi Yeshaya, again known today, he's the Shalah, right? We'll find out why soon. At that time, was a renowned halachist and Kabbalist and an experienced spiritual leader. His soul, however, yearned for the air of Eretz Yisrael, right? Right. We certainly have come across people over the ages, and I certainly today, who want to go and live, spend their final years in Israel. Following his wife's death in 1620, he began to think seriously of departing for the Holy Land, which he finally did in 1621. He left behind his friends and family and resigned from his post as a rabbi of Prague. He shared his actual departure date with only one or two intimate friends, but not to the public or even to his own children. Having already made up his mind, he didn't want anyone to dissuade him from leaving. Oh, Pa, it's a dangerous journey. You don't know what you're going to expect there. So you could just imagine what all the arguments are. As a parting gift to his children and numerous disciples, Rabbi Yeshaya wrote an ethical will in which he outlined the ideal way of life. And this is popular. Some people to this day will write an ethical will to their children. It's not just a will of who gets the vase in the living room, or something. It's a guideline, a guidepost, how one should conduct your life. What should you remember what your father or mother taught you, right? It included customs and laws for the whole year, elaborations on the fundamental tenets of Judaism, basic instruction in Kabbalah, right? You see, a lot of them dabble in Kabbalah. I wouldn't say they're Kabbalists, but they have great interest in it. A commentary to the Torah and many, many other miscellaneous matters. Now we're going to come to how he's known as the Shalah. This monumental work. Now, remember, this was like an ethical will, but it wasn't like 3 pages long or something. This became a book. One of the gems of Jewish ethical literature was called Shnei Luchot HaBrit. So the Shin Lamed Hey, that's Shlah. Okay. And notice it was published in Amsterdam, right, in the 17th century. It won its author everlasting fame, and both the work and its author are reverently called the Shlah HaKadosh. So should you ever attend a lecture or possibly read something and they talk about the Shlah, then you'll remember who he is. This work grew in size and scope as it was being written, and Rabbi Yeshaya could not finish it while yet in Prague. He completed it only after spending a number of years in Eretz Yisrael, and he sent it to his children in Europe. Pay attention, children. No, there's Dad speaking here, guiding you what you should do, how you should conduct your lives. Rabbi Yeshaya's journey took him through Germany and Italy, and from there on to Syria. He was received in the old Jewish communities of Aleppo and Hama, that's Homs, I think, today, with the greatest of respect. He was even asked by the scholars of Damascus to remain and become their spiritual leader, which is interesting because he was certainly an Ashkenazi Jew and they are Sephardic. However, his heart was set on living in Yerushalayim, and he accepted the post of rabbi in Rosh Yeshiva to the Ashkenazi community of Jerusalem without receiving a salary. I guess he had enough funds. He didn't feel the need to accept a salary. He probably lived very modestly. In Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yeshaya was given the opportunity to acquaint himself with the Kabbalistic writings of Rabbi Chaim Vital. Now you see how he is being influenced by Kabbalah. Rabbi Chaim Vital, he was the student of the Ari, the Arizal is known as, who was this great Kabbalist. Originally, he came from Egypt, but then he settled in Israel, in Tzfat, right? And his works were actually hidden. Rabbi Chaim Vital was privy to their location and he guarded it, but eventually, some students had found access to it. And then once it was then published, it proliferated, throughout Europe. And then that's what will influence the Hasidim of a later generation. That's why, you daven sometimes, like Hasidim, it's Nusach Ari, they're following the Arizal. But again, when you think of the Ari, associated more with Tzfat, and he's buried, if you've been to Tzfat, you go way down, there's a cemetery there, and that's where he is buried. Okay, so he becomes familiar with the writings of Rabbi Chaim Vital, and that as a result, he then knew the system of the Ari. And at that point, it was not known in Europe. Okay, it's going to spread afterwards, and with other, obviously, Kabbalistic manuscripts. However, in 1625, life in Jerusalem was made intolerable for the Jews due to the tyrannical rule of Ibn Farouk and his brother-in-law, Othman Aga. who extracted large sums of money by pillage and torture. So this is Ottoman Empire time. During the Shabbos morning service on the 11th of Elul, 15 rabbis and leaders of both the Sephardic and Ashkenazic communities were arrested without warning or cause. Rabbi Yeshai was not released until 15 days later. Some of the captives were not released until Rosh Hashanah. The community was then forced to pay an exorbitant ransom fee to free the rest of its leaders. Fearing for his life, Rabbi Yeshai fled first to Tzfat and then on to Tiberias. He spent the last 5 years of his life in Tiberias and was buried near the tomb of the Rambam. I have been there. I don't remember. Obviously, I don't think I was the time that I was there so many years ago that I was familiar with who the Shalah was. But obviously, I guess if you should go today to the city of Tiberias, you can find his tomb there. Rabbi Yeshai's other outstanding work written in Israel is called Sha'ar Hashamayim, right, Gate to Heaven, published also as Amsterdam at that point. We'll be doing the Jews of Holland after I finish this at another lecture, had established a printing press, and that's why a lot of these works are being published there. And that also, it's a Kabbalistic commentary on the Siddur. Rabbi Yeshai conceived the plan to write this commentary in 1621 when he entered Jerusalem. He finally concluded it on the Friday of Parshas Vayetze, the biblical portion which contains the reference to Yerushalayim as a heavenly gate for prayer, hence Sha'ar HaShamayim. Rabbi Yeshaya felt that in this way he could share in the prayers of all Israel. So now you know who the Shlah is, all right? And you, if I say, should you come here, listen to a lecture, or perhaps read an article, and they mention him, you'll know who he is. Here's another very interesting person. I'm going to go, if with your permission, to 11, since unfortunately the first number of minutes, I was having trouble with my own computer. Okay. Rabbi Elio was born in Frankfurt am Main, all right, it's originally German, a descendant of Rashi and a grandson of Rabbi Yosselman of Rashi. Remember, we started off learning about him earlier. He was a disciple of several rabbanim, including the Maharal of Prague. Rabbi Eliyahu served successively in the rabbinates of Fulda. People with these last names, now you know where their name. The names came from the cities where they lived. Fulda, Hanau, I know people, last name was Hanau, Friedberg, and Worms, where he also officiated as the Rosh Yeshiva. He may also have spent time in Poland, where he served as Rabbi of Chelm. We think of Chelm, the wise men of Chelm, which are out there, these ridiculous people, but whatever. I mean, it was a real city and regular people lived there. A very gifted and talented writer, Rabbi Eliyahu prepared for print many books of previous sages, which had until then remained only in manuscript form. So it's thanks to him and his work that we have these to this day. Among these are Darchei Moshe on the Tour by the Ramah. Okay, the Tour again. This is even before the Shulchan Aruch was written. That was a way of organizing all of Jewish halacha in 4 different rows. And as a result, when the Shulchan Aruch is written by Rabbi Yosef Kara, it's also in 4 different sections. All right, so it's based, each generation we build upon what's come in the past. Was also who wrote about the Marshall's commentaries to the Smog and Shari Dur. I can't repeat who all these people are, but just take it from me. These were other great rabbonim from previous generations. As for his own writings, Rabbi Eliyahu authored a homiletic commentary on the Psalms. Psalms, you need the G there. Okay, that's Shir Hashirim, containing some Kabbalistic material, as well as a commentary on Ecclesiastics, that's Koheles. Both commentaries contain much ethical matter and exhortations to live a life of piety and good deeds. Rabbi Eliyahu also wrote poetry, as well as a long commentary on the Zohar. And the Zohar is considered to be the original work of Kabbalah. Rabbi Eliyahu, known as a saintly personality, was known as a performer of miracles. Okay. Sort of trying to sound like the Maharal, having the power to cure the sick with his prayers and amulets. Known as Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem, he was said to be a master of the holy names of God, by which he performed his acts of mercy. Let's do one more person, I think. Rabbi Meir Schiff, the Maharam Schiff. Okay, now we're definitely into the 17th century. He was born in Frankfurt am Main. Rabbi Meir's father, born in Frankfurt am Main, Rabbi Meir's father was a respected scholar and Rosh Yeshiva. His family counted among its antecedents the oldest settlers in the Rhine Valley. Rabbi Meir's fame as a brilliant scholar manifested itself very early. At the young age of 17, he was already rabbi of nearby Fulda, where he headed a prominent yeshiva. 17 years old, imagine how brilliant he was. Rabbi Meir's lectures on Talmud were eventually published. His chidushim are terse, incisive, and chidushim, from the word chadash, his new insights and new interpretations. That's what that would mean. They're terse, incisive, and pertinent to the proper understanding of the subject matter. And his conclusions are profound and far-reaching. They are among the gems of Talmud commentary. These chidushim were not published until almost a century after Rabbi Meir's death. Most of the comments are today printed in most large editions of the Talmud, the Gemara. Just so to you all remember this, I had taught this in the past. Talmud means Mishnah plus Gemara, all right? So when you say you're studying a work of Gemara, there's always a little part of the Mishnah and then the whole discussion from the Gemara. Rabbi Meir also composed a commentary on the Torah and other Kabbalistic works. In 1644, Rabbi Meir was appointed rabbi of the prestigious community of Prague, but he died shortly thereafter at the young age of 36. I think I'll pause here. We will finish this next time we get together next week. Those of you who are here on the circle, obviously via Zoom again, but Mir Hashem, no more hurricanes, halavai. And I will be teaching in person at Century Village next week. You should all be well, safe, right? Healthy. Yes, Hashem, have a good week coming up. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Take care.